Welcome to Building the Future, hosted by Kevin Horick. With millions of listeners a month, Building the Future has quickly become one of the fastest rising programs, with a focus on interviewing startups, entrepreneurs, investors, CEOs, and more. The radio and TV show airs in 15 markets across the globe, including Silicon Valley. For full showtimes, past episodes, or to sponsor the show, please visit buildingthefutureshow.com.
Welcome back to the show. Today we have Philip Wong. He's the CEO at Ferris Diagnostics. Philip, welcome to the show.
Hey, Kevin. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the show. I think what you and the team at Ferris Diagnostics are doing is really, really innovative, cool, life-saving. But maybe before we get into all that, let's get to know you a little bit better and start off with where you grew up.
Sure. I'm actually a native LA person, but I grew up in Taipei. I was born in Taipei and then moved to LA, and actually was educated in the US, and have been on the East Coast and the West Coast. And the last 14 years, I was based out of Asia.
Oh,
with a
very
number of
cool.
different companies.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love LA. I try to get there every year, and I lived down there for a while, LA holds a special place.
Yeah, it's definitely a
it's
great
cool.
place to be.
Especially for startups, right? Or one of the best
Yes.
places. So very cool, man. So you went to university. What did you take and why?
I studied chemical engineering in MIT. So I was in Boston for 4 years, and was actually pursuing medicine for some time. I had done a lot of volunteering at Mass General Hospital and in LA as well. But I think the actual kind of side of blood and a lot of that kind of and eventually turned me away from that. And then being at MIT, I decided to go for engineering and study chemical engineering because that was the closest to medicine in terms
Sure.
of application.
Very cool. No, makes sense. So walk us through your career up until coming up with the idea for Ferris, and let's dive into that.
Yeah, so I have always been, engineer. So after spending 4 years in Boston, then decided to come back to California and studied up at Stanford. I was in the PhD program there, also doing bioscience research, working on proteins that were relevant for a disease called celiac sprue. Then there was a bit of a startup craze during the end of the 2000 era, and I got pulled into one of the startups and left my PhD program, and then came back to finish the engineers part of it. But it was kind of a interesting point of time in my life there, and so doing both startup and a degree. And then I joined a startup called Affymetrix, and was doing customer support there after the engineering part of the degree was finished, and I was in the startup. Actually, sorry, before that I was with Caliber and doing engineering there, and decided to work into doing voice supporting customers through the voice of the customer, building products. And then from there I went off to do an MBA in Singapore. And then from Singapore, my first job out of Singapore, I was shipped off to China to do an acquisition of a pharmaceutical API, active pharmaceutical ingredients plant in northern China by a Jordanian company. So that was kind of a big adventure. So when I was pursuing jobs, always I was looking for more than a job, more of an adventure. So being out, seeing Petra and being in the Middle East, and then going off to China, that was a fantastic experience. So, I highly recommend that.
No, very cool. So walk us through what exactly is Ferris Diagnostics, and let's dive into that.
Yeah, so Ferris Diagnostics is a very innovative AI machine learning based early cancer screening test. So
Very cool.
we use a non-invasive method, which requires a bit of blood, about 10 mils of it of blood that's drawn from your arm, and then through that we can concentrate and find these little targets called microRNAs in the blood, and so we can construct a profile of signatures of patients that have cancer that have a profile, and then patients that don't have cancer that are healthy, and then use that to build an algorithm that can distinguish, the precancerous or cancer patients from those who are healthy. So hopefully through that, through earlier detection, we can save lives because most of the cancer patients find out too late they have cancer, and so by that time you're really limited to using drugs that expand your lifetime like a few months. And so the earlier the cancer is found, it's really restricted in its growth, and then so you could actually resect it or cut it out, surgically. And so that's typically the best way of preventing or curing cancer at the earlier stages. Once it's spread, it's very hard to contain it. So hopefully through earlier detection using our technologies, we can save more lives and give patients more time with their families.
No, that's very cool. So, how did you come up with the idea and then actually like what you're doing isn't simple. So, how did you go from like idea to actually doing this thing?
Yeah, so it wasn't totally my idea. So it was a team effort. I was
Okay.
actually brought on as a CEO. Um, uh, I was previous to this, I was at a larger company called Roche, scouting and looking for ideas. And
Okay.
so my job back then, our team's job was to go and look at companies that we should buy. And so through this kind of fortuitously, I got to know one of the technology founders that had spun this technology out. So
Okay.
we started in 2022, had the company funded, then I joined, and then we brought the team, up to our current kind of stellar state with people from the industry, and then building the product out. And we just released two publications in the American Society of Clinical Oncology recently, in the last few days, and then have licensed in technologies from the City of Hope Cancer Hospital in Los Angeles. So making good strides to make our technologies available to people.
Okay. So very cool. So how does it work exactly? Like if I want to get this done, do I have to go to a facility? Like how does this kind of work, right? Me as a
Right.
patient or and then let's do it from like the doctor kind of hospital side.
Yeah. So as a patient, you would typically go to your doctor, your GP,
Okay.
and if you have a family history, they may recommend this test, or you could maybe request it. So once our product is launched, it's still in kind of pilot or
Okay.
clinical trials right now. But you're welcome. You and listeners are welcome to go find a center that's doing clinical trial and join it. But once a product is fully launched, you could ask the doctor to prescribe the test, and then they send you, just like they do right now, to send you to a blood draw center where they would draw your blood and then send that to our lab for processing.
Okay.
Then the results get sent back to the doctor, and then you go see the doctor again. They would say, "Hey, Kevin, you look good. No cancer, so don't worry about it." Or if it's not so good positive news, then they would share that with you as well, and maybe with further testing down the road.
Got it. Okay. So how does maybe without getting too technical, like how does your tech actually work, especially from what's kind of different now? Like, do you really even have any competitors doing something similar?
Sure. So it's a huge space. It's very um, untapped in terms of not only the technology, but also in terms of the business model. So all of this is very new. So in the old
Okay.
days, or actually even currently, people find out when they have cancer. When they have cancer. So being able to prevent cancer or catch cancer early is something of a holy grail, and one of our competitors actually named that. So
Yeah.
there's a bunch of companies all working in this space using different technologies, and
Okay.
so some are looking at tumor cells in the blood, some are looking at DNA that's sloughed off by these cells. We are looking at markers called microRNAs, which are kind of the on-off switches in the blood. There are about a couple thousand of them in the blood, and so actively expressed, about 500. So it's a lot of data to go through. So in the old days, they look at one thing in your blood, and
Right.
it's not very accurate. So most of the things that's currently assessed for different types of cancers, and some there's really no way to assess the cancer because, for example, for the lung, at least you could take a low dose computed tomography, which is kind of like a multi-dimensional X-ray. They can shoot radiation at you and look at an image. For the colon, they could stick a endoscope inside of you, right, and check for polyps. But there are just some parts of the body, like say the pancreas. We're working on the pancreatic test with the City of Hope. It's insulated by all these organs outside of it, so you can't really see it. And usually by the time it's found, it's stage 3, stage 4, and the fatality rate is quite high, with usually less than in half a year for people to live. So yeah, having an early detection test non-invasively, you can just go and do a checkup every year and test for it. That would be amazing. And I think there's a lot of interest from both the investment space as well as the competitive space to tackle this. But it's a very I wouldn't say easy endeavor. It's actually quite involved and complicated. And so the hurdle is that we have to prove that we're much better than current standard of care, which
Got it.
for some cancers is not as hard, but for others, you have to have lots of patient data to convince the medical community that your test is just as good as something else they have.
Right. Yeah, fair enough. And well, obviously, and you can correct me if I'm wrong in this, is I'm assuming certain cancers are harder to detect than others. And
Yes.
because there's so many variations, that actually makes your technology even more challenging because you have to allow for all these different variations. It's like I get, probably you have a better way of saying that if that's not true.
Yeah. So I think it's a very interesting look at the problem. So early on, we actually looked at about 8 different cancers. So
Okay.
looking for, can we have a single blood test that look at all such cancers? So within that experiment, we even looking at 8 cancers, we had varying degrees of uh, of accuracy, right? So they kind of have overlap, but not exactly. So it turned out that lung cancer testing was most accurate at the time. We had 92% accuracy. So we started with that as our first indication to go after. But there are kind of genetic overlaps between different cancers, but they're not all completely the same. So it's hard to identify. And the thing we want to do is really to deliver an answer that meets an unmet need and not, cause panic in patients, right? So
Yeah.
we don't want to give a test and say, oh, you have a X% chance of cancer somewhere. We don't know where. I mean, that's not very helpful to
Yeah,
both
that's
the
maybe
patient.
arguably worse.
Right, it's worse, right?
Yeah.
You go to sleep, you can't
Yeah.
you can't really fall asleep. But so what we want to do is address a really confined unmet need that really helps the doctor and the patient, right?
Right.
So for example, for our lung cancer test, the patient may have like a cough or something, some inflammation. They get a chest X-ray or a low-dose CT, and they find there's something there, right? Something, something on the image that is, sizable, maybe a few millimeters, but and dark, and they don't know what that is. And without really cutting it out or having a needle biopsy, which is essentially they stick a needle in there and extract tissue, which is not fun and invasive, and potentially also could extract cancer tissue to the rest of the healthy tissue as well.
Right.
So there's risk of that. Um, so we're trying to solve a problem that non-invasively lets us monitor ourselves more frequently, so we can catch it in its earlier stages. Which with the current techniques, it's not. So right now, with our collaborator, Dr. Xie, he estimates around 40% of the lesions that we find on an image, in the lung cancer image, that you find a 3 to 5 millimeter nodule, that 40% of the time, those are actually benign. So it could be just some inflammatory tissue. It's actually not
Interesting.
cancer. But without actually cutting it out, you won't know right now. So our test is to solve the problem of, okay, well, you see something there that's suspicious. Um, our value is being able to stratify and assess the risk of that being cancer or not. So if we can tell you it's high probability of cancer, okay, then go for surgery or something more invasive. But if it's not, then don't worry about it, right? So maybe just something that'll go away. And we have seen lesions go away
Interesting.
after they've recovered. So
So you touched on it a few minutes ago, and I just want to be clear. Like, so if I'm healthy and I go for the test yearly, just and then you could maybe say like you're maybe at risk in the future of getting cancer, and like we want to keep doing like, can you basically say like you're more at risk of maybe getting it down the road, but you don't have it today? Like, can you
mm,
do that kind of stuff, or how does that work?
yeah, so it's a good question. So there's um I a a few different type of tests. So what you're mentioning there is kind of a genetic risk. So there are
Yeah.
companies that,
Okay.
for example, test certain genes for certain types of cancers. For example, BRCA would predispose you to breast cancer, for example, or
Right.
certain genes. But there are not um, these genes for all cancers, and so the predisposition there um, may or may not be accurate. But it's kind of like the
Ah.
bigger funnel.
Okay.
What our test does looks at your microRNA, which are kind of like your everyday state.
Oh,
So
okay.
the risk would tell you, okay, you have X% of of having this cancer, but your diet, whether you exercise, everything around you, whether you smoke, can affect that probability. And then our test is more immediate because we're looking at right now, today, what's happening in your bloodstream, right?
Okay.
So then that's determining, okay, are you really highly at risk for cancer right now? And so I think that's a bit more informative, but it's
Yeah.
also it's more accurate because trying to predict the future it may be good in terms of helping you define a better diet or being just more healthy in general, going to the gym, but it doesn't really tell you so much about, okay, do I really have cancer, right? So we want to define the problem of,
I
okay,
see.
I've just got cancer or stage 0 or stage 1, and then now I can do something about it rather than unnecessarily worrying you and say, oh, I have this X risk percent risk. So for example, my dad and my grandmother died of colon cancer. So
Oh, sorry to hear that.
even without going for genetic testing, I can tell you I have a high probability of colon cancer, right? So I do my annual screenings. Um,
Right.
the genetic test probably can tell that with more definity. So they can say, okay, yeah, you've got this gene that you shared with your grandfather and your grandmother that predisposes you to this cancer. But
Right.
then you still have to follow through and do it every kind of year, right? To do your colonoscopy or whatever test or screenings that you go after. So yeah, so there's that big genetic risk test. We look at the current state in terms of your body and whether you have cancer or not. And there's also other tests that look at what once you have or the person has cancer, whether that patient is recovering from cancer or what therapies are relevant for that cancer. Because once that patient has
Right.
cancer, there's also therapy selection. So they have cancer, they have these genes. What drugs could they use, right? So there's kind of different along the
I see.
spectrum of the patient journey, we call it. There's different parts when they're healthy, they're pre-cancer, when they have cancer, different type of tests that could help the patient along the whole patient journey.
Right. Okay. No, that makes sense. So you mentioned earlier use AI. How does that play into all of this?
Yeah, so we use AI, more specifically machine learning, when we
Okay.
do our case control tests. So basically, collect patient samples that are healthy, and then patients' blood samples that are cancerous. And what we do is we go through and essentially use machine learning to identify signatures. So, for example, we look at, say, start with 400 or 500 biomarkers, the microRNAs we look at in the blood, and then try to compare and find models really defining, okay, where do the cancer patients have signatures, say like a profile for these markers that's that's significant and relevant, right? So then statistically, so then say we collect 600 patients and split half of them, 300 cancer, 300 normal, then we have to find patterns essentially within these two populations that differ. So
Right.
say we start with 400 and then we say, well, we drop off some of these biomarkers because they seem to be the same between the two. And then we find, say, 20 or 13 in the case of our City of Hope paper, um, that are relevant for cancer patients. And we find a little signature, right, for these 13. Some are high, some are low, some are high. And we have a little, essentially a model that tells us when you have this model, then the cancer patient, it shows that the patient has cancer. In the healthy patient, the model will predict that they don't have cancer. So that's
Right.
how we kind of iteratively build the model through this type of case control study. And right now, we're also collecting further validation study. So we're actually sending in blind samples and say, hey, well, now we've built the model. Now we have something we know the answer to. We just throw it into a model, and can it tell us is it cancer or not? So
Right.
we have to do these type of tests to train initially, based on our model, but then also to validate based on new tests, new patients that we don't know the answer to.
Got it. Okay. No, that's really cool. So you kind of mentioned lung cancer. Is there any other types of cancer that people could maybe go actually get screened for now that you guys are in clinical trials for, that if people are looking to maybe go, that they could actually go do?
Sure. So right now we're testing samples in Irvine, California, at our
Okay.
partner lab, and we're developing the pancreatic cancer test that we license from the City of Hope Cancer
Okay.
Hospital in Los Angeles. So we have two tests. One is a pancreatic test that we in license from the City of Hope Cancer Hospital, which is a top 7 cancer hospital in the U.S. And the other test, the lung cancer test, is one we developed in the house or are developing in the house at clinical trials in several hospitals in Taiwan for the most
Okay.
part. But we're going to be establishing um, uh, additional patient samples, hopefully in the US soon as well.
Okay. So for people that are maybe in the medical space that are going to have to go through clinical trials or going through clinical trials, what advice or what things have you learned along the way that you could maybe like to pass on to other people? Because, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, from my understanding, like clinical trials can take years, right?
Right. So yeah, so in terms of clinical trials, I would say in our industry, it's probably the bottleneck because getting access to samples is equivalent to data, and there's really no shortcut around it because you have to file with the institutional review board. Make sure it meets all the ethics criteria, your clinical trial, and you have to talk to the doctor. There's a lot of administrative back and forth, contracting, and all this sort
Sure.
of stuff. So, and then each hospital is different, right? And then so you got to get a study nurse to coordinate. So yeah, it's a very complex. So I would say the earlier you can get that started, the better. We have looked at using biobank samples as well, and then you can certainly partner with companies or facilities for data as well. In the really early stages, when you're building your model, you can also look for pilot sites and look at facilities that may offer patient data samples that give you access to patient data with a bit of a fee. So kind of like biobank samples. So that can kind of accelerate in the very early stages when you don't need to go through a full on prospective trial. But towards the later stage of development, there really is no way around it.
Right.
So that's kind of where how well you can execute on the clinical side can really make a difference.
Okay. And how long does it roughly take to go from, or like to do your clinical trials? Like it's years, right? But like,
Hmm.
what's the average range? Like, how does that kind of work?
Yeah, so clinical trials actually vary. So it depends on the
Okay.
complexity of the trial, and also number of samples, right? So
Okay.
if you're trying to say change the standard of cares, for example, so that could take tens to hundreds of thousands of data points and over a decade maybe. So
Okay.
so
I
there's
see.
an organization in the US called the US Preventive Task Force that determines, say, the standard of care for screening for certain things like cancers. And they, for example, looked at over a decade worth of data to determine that low dose CT scans, so low dose computed tomography scans, are a good standard of care for testing for lung cancers. So sometimes it could take years. Hopefully, we can be a bit more um, shorter than that, because I think part of our strategy is to define our indication for use. So basically, what's your test good for, to be really, really defined. And
I
so
see.
we're not trying to. So if we were going to displace low dose CT scans, which is the current standard of care, as a whole, we're going to need a decade of data, right? And to
Right.
determine that. So because you have to convince the USPTF, the medical community, that your test is better than that existing data or existing test. But if we were just trying to improve upon it, which is what we're trying to do, so a patient comes in for the current standard of care, but the positive predictive value, or how accurate it's able to call something positive, is actually not quite um, good. So it can spot a lesion, but it can't tell you if it's cancer, right? So that
Okay.
means it can tell you there's a spot, but it can't tell you if there's the lesion, the black spot is cancer or not. So it's not really really predictive, right? So
I
what we're
see.
trying to do is to add upon that to boost essentially the performance of that low dose CT. And in that case, our defined range is much low, much our defined claim is much smaller. So we're not trying to displace the current thing. We're just trying to boost its performance, if you will. So there, hopefully, the hurdle to prove that our test is much better than the existing test is not as high, because we can already say that our test is in the 90s in terms of this PPV, or positive predictive value, whereas low dose CT is usually on the range of 20%. So
I
we
see.
already boost the performance, 70% just by using our test. So that, I think, the on the clinical trial design side, means that we don't need to collect a decade of data. Maybe a few years is enough,
Okay.
or even less, right? So, and then it's also different depending on different type of cancer. So some cancers where there is currently a screening criteria or method in place, it's harder to displace it, right? But if there's something like, say, pancreatic cancer, where there's a marker called CA19-9, it's not present in African Americans or Latinos, right? And so it's not really good for that underserved minority population. And in general, it's just not very accurate at all, because you could get that marker high, signal very high, but it turns out that the pancreas just was inflamed, and
Ah,
or
interesting.
something, so it's not very accurate. But if our test can can really tell if somebody has stage 0, stage 1, stage 2 pancreatic cancer, then we'd be the new standard of care, right? Because
I see.
and those instances where, in these cancers where there currently isn't a really good screening method, it may be that the regulatory authorities like the FDA may be a bit more lenient as well, because they may say, well, really isn't a good way to test anyway, so we may allow you to be cleared or approved with less samples, with less data,
Right. Interesting.
right? Because it's kind of like, well, there's really no other alternative,
Yeah.
right? So I'm not gonna, the burden of proof isn't as high, right? So
Right. Well, and the other thing too is what you're doing isn't really like you're not putting anybody's life in danger, really. You're actually
right,
trying to potentially like prolong their life or save their life, really.
yeah,
So like, yeah, no, that because that was gonna be my next question. He was like, well, why wouldn't they just like approve you? Because you're just trying, you're really just giving the doctor more data. And I get it's more
Exactly. Yeah.
complicated than just like a yes no answer, but
Right.
right, like you're providing more data, right? And I
Yeah.
guess as long as the data's accurate majority of the time, like that's
Yeah.
better than less data, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I get
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
not a medical professional, but like, yeah,
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. And I think it's really goes back to the Hippocratic oath, right? Behind the medical
right,
community where, first you do no harm. So
yeah,
so sometimes it's a bit more conservative in approving products because they
which
want
makes
to
sense,
protect
right?
patients. Yeah, which makes
Yeah,
sense.
yeah,
So I guess, yeah, but I think in this case I do agree with you because more data should tell you more, right? That then it's really a trade-off between risk and benefit in this case. So if they see, well, you know, the risk is relatively low, you're just telling somebody they have cancer. What's but the worst that could happen? You just go get more ultrasounds or whatever,
yeah,
and then take a deeper look. Maybe even do a biopsy, but that's still better than not having found it, right?
yeah.
The other side of it, I guess, is the reimbursement side. So
Uh,
so on the reimbursement or payer side, they also don't want necessarily to have a lot of tests because that increases the cost of healthcare in the US, which is already one of the highest in the world, right?
yeah.
So a lot of extraneous tests could increase the cost. So they also have to weigh, well, is this test worth the money that it costs to deploy it, right? So that's also a question they have to evaluate as well.
So how would that work then? Like, would you be covered under just like your standard kind of healthcare or employee healthcare? Like, how does that kind of work? Like today and maybe down the road, like where is that kind of at?
Yeah, so typically it takes a lot of clinical evidence before
Makes sense.
the insurance and payers would pay for a test like this. So
Okay.
usually the early adopters are people who pay out of pocket, right?
Okay.
And maybe like the organizations that provide it at a minimal cost, like say to firefighters or to
Ah,
to um, to certain populations that may be more at risk, right? So firefighters being
okay.
exposed to
Sure.
smoke and inhalation. So that may be funded by the government partly, right? And so
Right.
so there's these kind of earlier adopter groups that can start using it. But in general, if you're going to ask the doctor to do the test, they may say, well, are you going to pay for it, right? Because no insurance is going to pay for it yet now. But once there's greater adoption, the insurance community sees, down the road, there is value in this, they're saving money. They also have to look at the health economic side of things. Like if they're providing thousands or hundreds of thousands of these tests, are they actually saving more money from? They do the calculation of, am I saving more money from this, or am I saving more money from paying the cost of the drugs for the cancer patients once they have cancer, right? So they do kind of
Yeah.
this calculation, but that's usually, I would say, a 6 to 7 year process when you
Okay.
get to reimbursement. Usually you start with early access pilots, then you move to like building codes. You also have to have a code that the the doctor
Right.
can build to, and usually that could be built, and then there's kind of broader reimbursement once the medical or the insurance and payers, they are on board and they see enough data to justify it to roll out and pay for a larger population. And so
Got it.
there's kind of steps to that adoption curve. And so usually it's I would say a 6 to 7 year process,
Okay.
if you're lucky.
Yeah, okay, fair enough. So then what would be the cost today? And obviously it would probably go down over time, or does it stay the
Yeah.
same, or what, how does that kind of work?
Yeah, so we definitely want to make this as affordable as possible, right? So our goal
Sure.
is initially in the earlier stages of the test development, most companies they subsidize. So we may end
Oh,
up,
okay.
having to, because for minority populations or for certain populations, they may not be able to afford the test. But we want to get the test out there, right? So we may
Right.
end up subsidizing. So usually that becomes a cost for the company, like ours in the first 3 to 4 years, right, before it gets
Okay.
reimbursed. But we want to help. We want to get the test out there, and that also gets us more data to refine the test, right, and build more clinical evidence behind it. We can publish more papers to convince the medical community that it's a good test, and then hopefully they convince the reimbursement community that, yeah, you guys should pay for this, right? So it's kind of a evolving
Okay.
thing. But yeah, initially, the cost depends on where we do it. So in
Ah,
in in Taiwan, the costs are a bit lower. So if we can run, but obviously it's harder for us to send samples to Taiwan where one of our labs is. But in the US, we're trying to get the test down to a few $100s per test,
okay.
right?
Well, yeah, that's
So
affordable. Yeah.
so that's affordable, and I think I think that's something that we want to shoot for, so that it's affordable on kind of an annual basis, right? Not in like thousands of dollars, right?
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And then roughly how long from me giving blood will I know the results? Like a couple
Mhm.
days kind of
Yeah,
thing, or how does that
you'll
work?
yeah, you'll know in more than a few days. So it
Okay.
depends on also proximity to the
R-
lab and kind of the logistics,
Fair enough.
because when you go get the blood drawn, they have to ship the blood to our lab, right? That
Ah,
could be, depending on location, that could be a day or two,
okay.
but it would need to be refrigerated and it's processed at our lab. Usually the lab work, depending on how many samples there are, is like a 3 to 5 day process. But then they
Okay.
also need to get that test analyzed and by the bioinformatics team, and then to check for errors and all sort of things, and then send that report back to the doctor, and then the doctor needs to call you back because we can't
Yeah.
just send the test to you, because we don't want you to misunderstand what's written, and it's always better under the doctor's guidance. So
Yeah.
I think the bottleneck's actually in when you can get your next appointment with the doctor.
Yeah, that's probably fair. Yeah. Okay, fair enough. um, so I'm curious. I'm assuming you guys raise money for this.
Yeah,
Do you have any advice? Because obviously doing something like this is capital intensive.
sure.
Like, do you have any advice for people looking to raise money in this space? And then how do you what are your thoughts on kind of ongoing raise, like, and hitting milestones? Like, how did you guys do it? And what advice have you learned along the way?
Yeah, yeah. So we were a bit lucky. So we towards the middle of 2022, we were lucky enough to get funding from the Li Ka-shing, who's a billionaire philanthropist
Oh, very cool. Congrats on
in
that.
Hong Kong. Yeah, and so he has two companies, CK Hutchinson and CK Life, that are listed in the Hong Kong Stock Exchange, that invest in life sciences as well as other industries. So they invested in us back in 2022, and then that's funded us so far in our key operations in Taiwan, near Hsinchu, where Taiwan Semiconductor and a lot of the chip companies are based. So being in Taiwan allows us to be a bit more capital efficient with the lower cost of development there, and so we're trying to also conserve and our cash runway by being there for the most part. But we do have commercial activities and partnerships already in the US as well. So we're looking forward to raising our next round soon, by the end of this year, to accelerate our progress. But I think in terms of um, the fundraising side, I think it really takes um, a lot of refinement and just a lot of trial and error and pitching. And I think having a good initial board helps. So our board introduces us to investors, and I, having been at a larger diagnostic company called Roche, was connected to a lot of the folks there, as well as the venture community. So that helps as well. But having a board member or somebody, a mentor that can help guide you to the right people, that would be fabulous. We're part of also the Larda Institute in LA. We were selected as a HEAL LA fellow or a cohort
Well, congrats
member,
on that.
and then
That's huge.
yeah, thanks. And then also as part of NVIDIA's Inceptions Lab. So I think being part of these type of organizations definitely allows you to tap into different networks. So the more network you can get tapped into, I think that will help in your fundraising.
Any advice for kind of finding board members or building that network? Because that can be really challenging in itself.
Yeah. I think And for me, it's been quite fortuitous. So, you know,
Okay.
we luckily we had the funding from the CK group to get
Right.
us started. But I think um, being able to craft a very personal message is something that draws people to you, right? So for me, it was quite personal. So it wasn't like a marketing
Sure.
gimmick. It was my dad had just passed away from cancer, and back in 2022, and actually on the day I was leaving Shanghai, you know, it was kind of a almost a enlightening moment for us in terms of, okay, what should I do as my next step? And then when this opportunity came calling, it kind of, you know, the stars were aligned. I had this personal mission. And so when I approached people, I was just very, very sincere and had this personal message about, hey, do you want to help me build this company? And so, you know, people like doctors Ajay Go at City of Hope, and, you know, we have a advisor from Kaiser Permanente, which is obviously a very large healthcare system, Dr. Longkey, you know, they were just, I guess, a bit touched by kind of what we're trying to do. And
Sure.
so, you know, you can, if you have your personal and company message, uh, you know, be really, really sincere, you draw the right people to you, and they will, it's kind of a snowball effect. Then they will bring other people, and then you'll get, you know, more and more people on board that want to be on this journey with you.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually really good advice, right? And people can feel when you're being sincere, right? And you're passionate about
Yeah.
something, especially when it's so personal to a founder, right? Like it, and it's also more motivating for you too to actually like make this thing work, right?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. It definitely is. And you know, I'm actually commuting between LA and Taiwan
Yeah, just a
kind of on a
quick
monthly
commute.
basis. It's a quick commute, but you know, I mean, I if it were just like any company, I probably wouldn't do it, right? But
Yeah.
it's such so personal to me. You know, my family and kids are in LA, but our company, our staff is in Taiwan. So it's sometimes really tough at times. But I mean, the only thing that really gets me through it is, you know, hey dad, you know, I'm doing this for you.
Sure.
So yeah, so this is kind of like the thing that drives us, right, as founders. So
No, that's really cool, man. So I'm curious though, like how does this kind of work? Like, is your plan to eventually hopefully sell this to a big pharmaceutical company? Keep it
Mhm.
keep it just like under you guys, or like how does that kind of work? Because and you can correct me if I'm wrong, it seems like there's only like a handful of really big companies that could actually maybe grow this thing kind of globally, and you kind of need to maybe not sell to them but at least partner with them, or how does
Right.
that kind of work for this thing to really be kind of across the globe?
Yeah, yeah. And I think that that's ultimately our goal, right? To get this test as widely adopted as possible.
Right.
And I guess you're talking about exit options for companies like us. And so, you know, usually there's a couple ways. There are already some big players. So, you know, for us, it's really about not competition, but like how can we partner? And I come from a
Yeah.
business
Okay.
development background, right? So, you know, the more partners we can leverage, I guess you know, better. So I have my connections from my Roche days, you know,
Right.
and so I'm tapping into that, as well as you know, other connections in Asia. So you know, I have in my mind a partner for data strategy. So we're, you know, we're not
Right.
trying to create a silo and we be the ultimate, you know, monopoly in this cancer space, but you know, it's about partnerships. Like, how can
Sure.
I help you? Can we have connections in Asia? Can I help your test here? And so can we license our test there in the US and use your sales team, right? So about not, you know, um, I find it kind of disheartening. Sometimes I see a lot of startups fail and they kind of overspent on sales teams or on the wrong stuff, and they could
Yeah.
have, you know, kind of all worked together to collaborate and made all of their tests much better. And so I think that would be a better and wiser use of the
That's
investors
actually
funding, and as a whole better for humanity, right? Because in this space we want to promote healthcare.
yeah, that's actually really good advice outside of healthcare, just even doing like a regular software startup, right? That's not has
Yeah.
anything to do with like saving people's lives. Where yeah, like your ultimate mission is to cure cancer and be part of it, right? And if you
Mhm.
can bring up the whole community around that, that's better for everybody and humanity, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really honorable. That's cool, man.
Thank
Um,
you. Yeah.
well, we're kind of coming to the end of the show, but is there anything else that you'd like to maybe mention? And then maybe just again talk about where people could actually maybe go and do one of
Right.
these clinical trials, and then let's close the show with where people can get more information about you, you guys.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks, Kevin. I think in terms of getting access to the clinical trials, if you're in Taiwan or happen to be there, you can work with our hospitals at McKay Memorial, at
Okay.
Chunga Memorial, at National Taiwan University Hospital. In the U.S., there's City of Hope
Okay.
in Los Angeles. You can get access to information there. We're also working with Research DX in Irvine, California. And then happy, if you ping us to connect you to the right people if you're interested.
Very cool. And the website?
Our website is www.ferusdx. So that's PHARUSDX.com.
Perfect, Philip. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to be on the show, and I look forward to keeping in touch with you and having the rest of your day.
Yeah, thank you very much. Very happy to be here, Kevin, and thank you again for the kind invitation.
Yep. Thank you very much. Okay. Bye.
Bye bye.
Thanks for listening. Please visit our website at buildingthefutureshow.com to join the free community, sign up for our newsletter, or to sponsor the show. The music is done by Electric Mantra. You can check him out at electricmantra.com and keep building the future.